Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, what can we say about this 2016 presidential election cycle and the bizarre news that comes forth with respect to Donald J. Trump and his campaign, along with their connections with Russia, particularly with Russian President Vladimir Putin? It's something that really should be a bit aghast to everyone. It should be something that's appalling, because Russia does not have America's best interests at heart, and even though Donaldolf Julius Caesar Trumpolini will sit there and try and basically make it seem as though Russia is moving forward with America's best interests because he has kind words to say to the Russian strongman, showing their filial piety towards one another for being basically dictators, it just has no place in an open and honest society like that of the United States of America. But here we are, folks. This is the man that has been nominated for the Gutless Opposition Party, or GOP's, candidate for the highest office in the land. It's appalling. It's breathtaking. It's stunning. But there's more news that's come out with respect to that. Rather shockingly, indeed, this news has come forth that Paul Manafort has received $12.7 million in undisclosed funding from a pro-Russian Ukrainian candidate for their office of president. It's amazing. It's really shocking. And what it really boils down to is this idea that Trump always has had an affinity for Russia. That's why even his campaign manager, Paul Manafort himself, has had these connections with Russia. And that goes back to Manafort and Black. Remember Chris Black that was with the John the Mushroom Kasich campaign? Well, they had a consulting firm together, Manafort and Black, and it did have ties and connections with Vladimir Putin. But this most recent discovery, which was brought forth by the New York Times and then reiterated by Super Mexican with the Wright Scoop, just has everything there that could make a great spy drama. That is, if the spy drama was centering around talentless hacks such as Paul Manafort. But we do have a moment here. We have another moment for the mafioso quafioso. And it truly is something amazing to behold. From Russia with Manlove. Yes, folks, this comes straight from Russia with Manlove. It said from the New York Times, on a leafy street off Independence Square in Kiev, in an office used for years by Donald J. Trump's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, when he consulted the Ukraine's ruling political party, his furniture and personal items were still there as recently as May. All right, folks, so he was already considering joining up with the Donaldolf by that point. Of course, he had not been brought in any official capacity yet, but that was certainly what they were thinking, and, you know, it just is one of those things. But still, Manafort's presence remains elsewhere in the capital. And that's the funny thing. That's the funny thing that just refuses to go away. So where is his presence in the other part of the capital, according to the New York Times? Why, it is government investigators examining secret records which have found his name as well as companies he sought business with. And they were trying to untangle a corrupt network they say was used to rob Ukrainian assets, or just siphon Ukrainian assets and influence elections during the administration of Manafort's main client, former President Viktor F. Yanukovych. Yes, that's right. So they found these handwritten ledgers that complicitly show that $12.7 million in undisclosed cash payments had been designated for Mr. Manafort from Mr. Yanukovych's pro-Russian political party from the period of 2007 to 2012. This is according to Ukraine's newly formed National Anti-Corruption Bureau. Boy, isn't that a mouthful there. An anti-corruption bureau in a government. But investigators assert that the disbursements were part of an illegal off-the-books system whose recipients also included election officials. So there we see that Paul Manafort really is connected with fraud, connected to fraud at the deepest, darkest, dankest levels. But again, the salivating mainstream media is only going to cover this in so much as they're going to try to use it to hurt Donald J. Trump against Hillary Rotten Clinton. They're not going to delve into the deeper aspects of it to where this is literally harmful to the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. No, that would go beyond the pale for them. It would go against their twisted Fabian socialist agenda. But the narrative is there for everyone to see, and it truly is from Russia with man love. And so, what is it with Manafort and Trump and the Russian connection? I've had friends of mine, dear friends of mine, say that NATO really should have to pay, and that America has been doing all of the quote-unquote heavy lifting for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and that we really should also try and reach out an olive branch to Russia. So, again, more from Russia with man love. But truly, this man love that exists between Putin and the mafioso quafioso is laughable if the consequences for it weren't so dire, if the threats weren't so real. But the threats are very real, and the consequences that will be resultant therefrom are very real as well. Folks, I don't like to just make light of this, but you sort of have to in order to maintain a modicum of sanity. The way that this 2016 presidential election cycle has just unfurled before our very eyes leaves us with very little room for doubt that the mafioso quafioso has some deep-rooted ties to Russia. And then look at the way that he always chooses a foreign national to be his wife. You know, there was Ivana. I believe the second one was the only one that was American. The third one, the current Czech thumper, the Slovenian, Malaria Trumpolini, has ties to the Communist Party through her own parents there in Slovenia, but I'm sure that the Lion Branch Trumpvidians will just come forth in their shrill, discordinal, disharmonious tones and tell us that that's just the price of a mail-order bride. I know. It just never ceases to amaze me the way that they will genuflex to try and excuse and be an apologist for their fearless leader come hell or high water. But I think that the American people deserve better than this. I think that we demand better than this. And clearly, the problems that we're facing in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours, as we have so oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, is certainly traced to a departure from the Constitution. But in the case of Trump, where do his loyalties lie? We know that he doesn't find any intrinsic or inherent value with the supreme law of the land, which, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2 of our shared United States Constitution, is none other than the United States Constitution itself. But does he have loyalty to Russia? He certainly had nothing but nice things to say for Vladimir Putinlinsky. Mr. Trumpolini over there, he's good for Russia. Mother Russia love Trumpolini. Good. Why? Why do we need to do that? Putinlinsky?
Well, Amerikaninskis, you just need to realize that with respect to Donald J. Trump, it is always and has always been a very, very good relationship. It truly is this. From Russia with man.
Yes, indeed. From Russia with man love. We see that Trump has gone so far as to push for the Russians to go out and spy on his political opponent. And irrespective of how wicked and truly evil Hillary Rotten Clinton is, it's sedition to try and invite a foreign power to come in and spy on Americans, particularly when you know for a fact that in her position as the former Secretary of State under the disastrous two terms of the, or at least the disastrous one term of the Barack Hussein Obama regime that she served, what was put up at risk because she kept it on a private server in a Colorado loft apartment bathroom. Then again, we also know that the DNC was hacked and they went out and blamed Russia. And so Donald J. Trump thought that that would be the perfect opportunity to step out in front of the cameras for the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media in order to try and score some political brownie points, even if those political brownie points came at the expense of national security here in these United States of America. If only that were the only sort of problem that we have encountered with the mafioso quafioso quaff waffler himself. I mean, who can forget when on July 27th of this year, he was in Doral, Florida, and he said the following. Folks, I've got this soundbite ready, queued up. I'm going to switch over to it now and put this in context with what we're discussing with respect to his campaign manager, Mr. Paul Manafort. So here we go.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. I think you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press. Let's see if that happens.
Did you see that? He said, we think you'll be rewarded mightily by our press. It's really, really such a stupid statement, but it is par for the course when it comes to the mafioso quafioso. But there's more to it than that. There is truly that threat with respect to Paul Manafort receiving the over $12 million in undisclosed payments, basically your under-the-table payments from the Ukrainian pro-Russian president back then. And that's amazing. That's amazing that this was not vetted, but I think, again, you heard the jab that he had there for the media, who has been complicit in helping him get into the position of the gutless opposition party, or GOP nominee, by giving him 3 times as much airtime as any other challenger during the gutless opposition party's presidential primary process, which is essentially giving him free airtime, free advertising. So they probably knew this at the time and sat on it. Certainly we knew that Paul Manafort, going back to when he was having his little internal Trump war with Cory Lewandowski, another Russian-sounding name, had ties with the Russian strongman, Vladimir Putin. You know, folks, you really can't make this stuff up. It's just too good, it's too juicy, it's too rich to be fiction. And that's one of the reasons why I've always had this manifest love for history. It's because it is the greatest drama, the greatest story, the greatest narrative that is more often than not stranger than fiction could ever hope to be. Because it is the resources, the failings, and the shortcomings, as well as a various cornucopia of other human characteristics and traits that come together in a perfect cocktail to create the story of who we are. And so Manafort plays the role of this Russian sellout. And that does beg the question, or at least raises the question, not begging the question in the sense of the logical fallacy, but it raises the substantial question of where are Trump's loyalties? Is Trump a Russian plant? Because I know that we have oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, that Donald J. Trump seems to be a Democrat plant because he's always had very close and, jovial relations with former President Bill Clinton and former First Lady and Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton. And of course, during 2008, he said he thought she would be a great president. In fact, that's who he was supporting. But now he's going to run against her? And sure, the Lion Branch Trumpidians and the supposed conservative punditry and commensurate with Lush Bimbo et al. Are going to come forth and try and say that I'm being unfair, that people change, and that Donnie has proven that he has changed. But no, Donnie has not proven that he's changed. He still went out and invited the Russians, as you heard in that soundbite, to come hack an American email server that contains potentially sensitive, classified documents. Why do we want to expose ourselves to greater danger? Why would we want to purposefully incite sedition? That is beyond the pale. And again, this is why my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, and I, as well as our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, have sat here on multiple occasions and said that Donald J. Trump really has no desire to win, that anyone who has a true desire to win would not engage in such seditious conduct, wouldn't engage in such salacious conduct, because it is just going to be fodder that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists can use to eviscerate him in the looming general election cycle that is slated for later this November. So who has Trump got to deal with? Because he loves to proclaim himself and to project this image of being the great deal maker, the greatest negotiator that has ever walked the sacred soil of the United States of America. After all, his magnus opus that his ghostwriter produced was called The Art of the Deal. Or is that The Art of the Squeal or The Art of the Steal? I get confused sometimes, just as I get confused as to which alter ego the mafioso quafioso has decided to use for whatever particular day that he has gone in front of the cameras of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. But the fact of the matter remains is that he's playing this dangerous game. He's playing a dangerous game in which he is putting our fortunes, our hopes, our fates and futures, and our national security in dire risk. This represents a clear and present danger, one that cannot be ignored, but one which, for far too long, the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media did sit on, did ignore. Again, allowing Trump to play the role of being the Pied Piper of disillusioned conservatives. Sadly, that's what this comes down to, folks. That is the untenable situation that the media and their allies in the rank and file of the Democrat Party, controlled by the Fabian socialist left, have thrown upon us. And of course, the detente wing of the gutless opposition party, or GOP, what is known in the common vernacular as the so-called establishment wing of the Republican Party, has gone along with this too. Rinse and Repeatus had gone out of his way, bent over backwards to ensure that the mafioso quafioso, the most unacceptable candidate in living memory for the highest office in the land, would clinch the nomination for the gutless opposition party. This is unacceptable. It's intolerable. But here we are, folks. This is why the 2016 presidential election cycle is beyond merely being the post-truth campaign. It is the post-patriotic campaign, because we have frauds trying to wrap themselves in some Orwellian doublespeak to claim that they are patriots, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. They are the ones that have been acting in a deleterious and detrimental manner towards the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. And this really should, all of this from Russia with Man Love, should really bring some of the Branch Trumpidians back to their senses. But I'm not going to hold my breath on that. They have looked forth and seen that Cheeto Jeebus has shown them a path which is just a mirage that allows him to say whatever they want to hear at the moment, and then they project their own image, their own self-identity, self-value, and self-worth onto him, and losing their own self-identity in the process. You see, this is again why Jeremy and I have tried to warn you not to do that, not to allow yourself to be pushed into such a raw emotional state that you shut down your mental faculties and that you embrace this unacceptable Trumptalitarian type of mentality that really does have no place in an open, honest, and above all free society like that of the United States of America. I wish that I had words of solace and comfort to convey unto you as I sit here and speak into my microphone, but I have none. This is the tragic and sorry state of affairs that faces us as we lumber ever closer to that general election cycle slated for later this November. It truly is a tragic state of affairs when you consider that the United States of America is in the midst of an identity crisis coupled with a slew of constitutional crises, all brought about by an out-of-control political system that no longer adheres to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. In other words, we have a governmental ruling elite that no longer believes in the natural law tenets, which by their very nature are timeless, and are working in such a way as to illicitly amass power unto themselves at the great and irreparable expense of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. But maybe I shouldn't say irreparable, because that would suggest that there is no way to repair the problems and the disasters that have been unleashed upon the body politique of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. I'm never willing to just give up hope on it, because I know that the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in these United States of America are capable of overcoming any hurdle, any obstacle, and any adversity that has been placed in their path, and indeed every force that has come forth in our relatively brief yet illustrious history to try and challenge the United States of America has had one common denominator. They have all underestimated the indomitable and unconquerable spirit of the American people. You see, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto understood it when he went forth to the warring fascist party that had taken control of the Empire of Japan and said, "You should never attempt to invade mainland America, because there will be a sniper hiding behind every blade of grass." Here it is again, folks, where the Second Amendment, our fundamental and inalienable rights which were endowed to us by our Creator, the God of nature, and in this case in particular, the fundamental and inalienable God-given right to keep and bear firearms, protected us. It gave an unwavering example to the rest of the world exactly the hefty price they'd have to pay if they wanted to tangle with the wielders of popular sovereignty in this great republic of ours. Of course, the historical revisionists don't want to teach it that way. They just want to focus on the dropping of the 2 atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima and use that as a proclamation of just how wicked and savage and barbaric the United States of America is and has always been. But of course, this is a bunch of bovine excrement. It's based in this New Age doctrine of political correctness and, of course, moral relativism. They would like to ignore the atrocities that occurred at the rape of Nanking. They would like to ignore the atrocities that the Japanese had carried out against American prisoners of war. They would like to ignore the fact that indiscriminately the Japanese had also killed civilians in the United States, and they viewed themselves as a deified race. In other words, they thought they were gods on earth. Now, that sort of twisted mentality
is dangerous. But it's certainly not something that has been eradicated from the face of this earth. We know that the Islamo-fascist state, ISIS, has that same type of radical fanaticism, that fanatical devotion to a cult of death, which wants to spread death to every corner of the globe. When we think of things in this context, looking at it in an objective fashion and examining the totality of the circumstances, we begin to fully realize that the foes that have stood up against the United States throughout our relatively brief yet illustrious history have also always been the agent provocateurs of tyranny, despotism, and oppression. And of course that makes sense, because we are a land that is built off of philosophy, as the late Maggie Thatcher said. And the philosophy of the United States is rooted in that Enlightenment mentality that had given us this very revolutionary doctrine and notion that sovereignty was not confined in the hands of a king or a king who was endowed with power by Parliament. No, sovereignty ultimately rests in the hands of we the people. That's why when you go to the opening lines of the preamble to our shared United States Constitution, you find proclaimed, emblazoned across the parchment in bold letters, "We the people do ordain and establish this Constitution in order to create a more perfect union." There you have it. There you have the true quintessential nature and essence of what it is to be an American citizen. To realize that our federal government is one of limited power that has been endowed to it or enumerated unto it by the people, delegated power and authority. And when the government abuses that power and authority and violates the strict terms and rules and applications that are contained within the four corners of the greatest social compact or contract ever devised by the hands of men, yet divinely inspired by providence above, then they are in breach of contract. And indeed, the terms of the contract itself, as you can find in the First Amendment, allows the people to congregate in order to petition the government for a redress of grievances, because the government, in this case, is acting in a rogue, tyrannical, and illegitimate fashion. Again, this is not something that's easy to admit. It's not something that's easy to say, yet it is something that we must admit if we are ever to place this nation back on to the path of prosperity. But as you can see, with the split interests from Russia with Manlove, with Paul Manafort and Donald Julius Caesar Trumpolini, their loyalties seem split. Their loyalties seem not to lie with the body politique of the United States of America, nor with the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people, because their loyalties seem to be on foreign shores, seem to be proclaiming the greatness and the glory of Russia as opposed to the United States of America. We should not tolerate that. We should not accept that. That is not a quintessential aspect of who we are, both as a nation and as a people. It's an unwelcome thing. It's an unseemly thing. It's an ugly thing. But it is a very real thing that is haunting us and has been haunting us for far too long. You see, Trump likes to play the populist game, but the populist game is to go forth and try to eradicate, destroy, and unravel all pre-existing political structures and forms. Again, this is something that we have so oft times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. We've been trying to warn you of the significant danger posed by the mafioso quafioso for nearly a year now, folks. And that danger has not dissipated in any way as the incessant march of time continues. So how do we overcome this problem? Well, first and foremost, we must admit that this problem exists, that there is this sort of fraudulent connection going on with Paul Manafort and the Trump train. If the Trump train is a train that is purposely aimed at the heart of America, going out of control at full steam ahead, then we must change the rails and derail it. Because what it is doing is working against the direct and best interests of we the people,
the ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. Again, I wish that I had words of comfort and solace to convey unto you, but as I look at this entire situation in as objective a fashion as I can, I am left with no choice but to think that he poses a much greater significant threat. And that's not to say that Hillary Rotten Clinton does not have connections with the Russians either. That's part of the whole concern that has arisen with respect to the so-called Clinton Foundation, the very one that Donald J. Trump in years past has donated over $100,000 to. Well, it has received special treatment and funding from Russians and from other various, perhaps even nefarious, foreign powers and entities. This is all being poured into the election cycle. It has all been a way to pervert and corrupt our electoral process here in the United States of America. And what we can certainly say with true absolute certainty is that it is violative of federal law. But again, as we have mentioned on previous episodes, this is against everything that we hold near and dear. This is going to be swept under the rug by the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media and by all of the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists, because they don't want there to be this damage to their twisted Fabian socialist agenda and propagandistic goal. But we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, being the new resistance, being the voice of freedom for this 21st century, realize what this is, and that is why we come forth and sit in front of our microphones and convey this message unto you, because our ultimate goal is to empower you, the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in the United States of America, so that you have the tools to foster that fluent working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution, and thereby your fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. It may seem abstract, it may seem off-point, but the fact of the matter remains, all of these nefarious forces that are vying for the reins of political power in the United States are doing so in a way that is diametrically opposed to the ultimate supreme law of the land, which again, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2 of the United States Constitution, is the Constitution itself. So do we want to have from Russia with man love, or do we want to have from the land of the free and the home of the brave a continuation of all that has endeared the United States of America to each and every one of us? Because if you recall, the only thing that we, in our capacity as American citizens, are called to swear allegiance to is the United States Constitution. Not to any singular individual, not to any singular political party, not to any singular political philosophy or ideology other than what is contained in the four corners and by the clear and concise language within those four corners of our shared United States Constitution. Again, this is why George Washington, upon his farewell address, warned of the dangers of allowing ourselves to be divided into disparate competing factions. Factions and factionalization cause us to lose sight of the things that truly matter, those important aspects that truly are defining characteristics of we the people, of the United States of America, and indeed of our very republic itself. This is why we say that the United States of America is currently in a battle for the hearts, souls, and minds of our people, our nation, and our traditions and institutions, and indeed our very sovereignty hangs in the balance, because the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists and their allies in the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media wish to fundamentally and permanently redefine the United States of America, transforming us away from being a constitutionally endowed federalist representative Republican form of government to some dark, twisted, and nightmarish, ghastly Fabian socialist dystopia. Now, folks, we should not bow down to that. We should not acquiesce to their twisted and diabolical schemes and plots, because we are the beneficiaries of the greatest birthright or inheritance of any people on God's green earth, And of course, that great birthright and inheritance of which I speak is our Constitution, is our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. And of course, we, in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, are the only ones who have been endowed with the power and authority and wherewithal to stand up for, to defend, to proactively maintain and safeguard our fundamental and inalienable rights. Indeed, that's exactly what our founding fathers expected us to do. But the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists, whose ultimate goal is to utterly annihilate the United States of America, both as a nation and as a people, have incrementally, over the past 150 plus years, begun to plant the seeds of their poison and destruction within the body politic of the United States of America. That means we are facing this untenable situation, this unsustainable situation, this damning situation. And instead of trying to seek some messianic figure, some strong man to come down from providence on a quaff-shaped cloud to save us from our predilections that are just unfurling before our very eyes, we should recall that the duty, obligation, and above all responsibility of proactively maintaining and safeguarding our rights and our representative Republican form of government that is the longest contiguous or uninterrupted constitutionally endowed republic in the entire course of human events is squarely our duty, and our duty alone. It's non-negotiable. And you see, that's another reason why my first officer, Jeremy Graventon, and I have such an ongoing struggle and problem and objection to the candidacy of the mafioso quafioso. We're not just merely dealing with, from Russia, with man love. We're dealing with a man who has no allegiance, no understanding, no appreciation of the supreme law of the land, and therefore, by extension, as the Constitution is the only thing that defines us as citizens and a nation, he has no value for any of us in our individual capacities, and he certainly has no value for our nation. Again, everyone likes to try and harp on this notion that Donald J. Trump is sticking it to the globalists. But back in 2012, he had written a document saying that we needed to do away with borders. He is really one that would like to sell our souls to multinational businesses. After all, that would allow him to fill his coffers, and he has always said that he is about being greedy. It's just that now he facetiously and erroneously and intellectually disingenuously claims that he is greedy for the nation. Maybe he's greedy for the reins of political power in the nation, but he is not acting in a way that is in our best interest, or acting in a way that would preserve our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. But what we see with all of this is that all of the dire, near prophetic predictions and warnings that we have made with respect to the mafioso quafioso are seemingly coming true. He has done nothing to abate them. He has done nothing to unify the party. He has done nothing to show us that he is more qualified than the shrieking witch Hillary Rotten Clinton herself. And that truly is a tragic position, because what the United States of America needs now more than ever is a leadership that understands that sovereignty squarely rests in the hands of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. We need a constitutional compositionist, someone who believes what is necessary for this country is to return all levels of government back to strict adherence to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of the supreme law of the land, our shared United States Constitution. And when you stop and think about it again, folks, the Constitution does not belong to the government. It does not belong to Donaldolph Julius Caesar Trumpellini other than in his capacity as an individual citizen like you and me and the rest of us. It doesn't belong to Barack Hussein Obama. It doesn't belong to Hillary Rotten Clinton. It doesn't belong to any of the candidates or former candidates or federal governmental officers or nameless, faceless, and ultimately unaccountable bureaucrats. No, the nation, the Constitution, our way of life, that belongs to we the people, because we are the ones that did ordain and establish
the Constitution, and the government. And when that government moves and operates in a way that is diametrically opposed to the hopes, dreams, aspirations, will, and consent of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, then that is a government that has become rogue, tyrannical, and ultimately illegitimate. These are the facts. That's all these are. We are merely dealing with the truth here, and the truth shall set each and every one of us free. But that is all the more difficult when, for the past 100+ years, ever since the rise of yellow journalism under the tutelage of William Randolph Hearst and his newspaper conglomerates of the turn of the 20th century, the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, with their sensationalist covering of the news, their slanted and lopsided, opinionated quote-unquote journalism passed off as objective reporting, has led people to accept what they say as the truth. And then when you combine that with Thomas Dewey's perversion of our education system, trying to teach all of the up-and-coming generations, and indeed, for him even, those generations which had yet to be born, to accept and acquiesce to a collectivist mentality, to try and root out their individual's character, heritage, spirit, and identity. And then they go and they try and propagate this on the national level as well, to try and redefine us, both as a nation and as a people, to fit their twisted and diabolical Fabian socialist agenda. None of that is beneficial. None of that works for us. None of that speaks to the heart of the matter or to who we truly are, both as a nation and as a people. And that in and of itself is diabolical. That in and of itself is wicked, evil, and terrible. Yet, it is the untenable situation that we find ourselves in as we head closer to that general election cycle slated for later this November. As I sit here and speak into this microphone, I have a just distressed feeling about all of it, because I know what the United States of America is capable of. Being the great student of history that I am, having this great love of history that I do, I know what America is capable of. I know that America is able to surmount seemingly insurmountable odds. And in fact, that has been one of the quintessential hallmarks of who we are, both as a nation and as a people. But the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists and their allies and the historical revisionists that have infiltrated the ivory tower of academia from coast to coast and border to border don't care. In fact, they're trying to unravel the societal fabric of this great country. And they want us to suffer. They want to lower us so that we are supposedly put in our place. Because deep in their minds and in their heart of hearts, they believe that the United States of America has been this great prognosticator of wickedness that we stole from others. That's how we reached such lofty heights in a relatively brief amount of time. But it's bovine excrement, folks. It's bovine excrement because it's their attempts to march forth with the twin cancerous doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism. The only thing that those two doctrines are attempting to accomplish is the destruction of our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. They have pit the system against the people. And they have gone back to the tried and true, although threadbare, tactics and strategies of divide and conquer, thereby pitting American citizen against American citizen in the hopes of carrying out their twisted, diabolical, and sinister deeds, plots, and machinations. But we can overcome this. We can overcome it because we are the beneficiaries of the greatest birthright of any people on the face of the earth, and that is, as what we have so oft times mentioned here on Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, none other than our shared United States Constitution. And unless and until we continue to recall that, and unless and until we begin to stand up, as our founding fathers expected us to, for our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, we are going to continue to suffer these problems. We're going to continue to encounter
in election cycle after election cycle, less and less acceptable candidates, because we have bought into this erroneous doctrine and notion of voting for the lesser of two evils, as if that would somehow, at some point, magically open us up to correcting the problems that are within the party. Well, that has become nigh impossible because of the detente wing of the gutless opposition party, or the so-called establishment leadership of the Republican Party. They have solidly thrown their weight behind the mafioso quafioso, and they have done so to their own great detriment. The party was already reeling, and indeed the detente wing of the gutless opposition party, or GOP, does bear the brunt of the blame for the bizarre ascendancy of the New York billionaire, businessman, real estate tycoon, and all-around vulgarian Donald J. Trump, John Miller, and John Barron. It's like a three-headed hydra. It's like that dog Seraphus who was guarding Medusa's lair. Well, the way that Perseus defeated that three-headed dog was to go after the heads. And here, with John Barron, John Miller, and Donaldolf, Julius Caesar Trumpolini, we see the three heads. The three-headed Russian-loving, from Russia with man love, man who really is not looking out for the best interests of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people. This isn't fear-mongering on my part, though, folks. This is an attempt to convey the truth unto you, calling the facts as I see them, but again, I don't expect you to take what I'm saying here at face value. We want you to look into this for yourself, to dig deeper, to discover the truth as it is, because it is the truth that will set each and every one of us free. And that is why we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, come forth and produce these shows for you. It is for you, to empower you, to give you the tools necessary to foster that fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution, and thereby your fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, so that you can more easily discern who it is that is trying to strip and deprive you of those God-given inalienable rights, so that you can put your foot down and recite the most universally understood monosyllabic word of the English lexicon, no. No, you cannot take away my rights, and no, you cannot fundamentally and irreparably transform my beloved homeland away from being a constitutionally endowed, federalist, representative, Republican form of government to some dark, dank, twisted, Orwellian, nightmarish dystopia based on Fabianism. Because that in and of itself is a wicked thing. That in and of itself, per se, sua sponte, is wicked or evil. We are not a nation of wickedness. We are not a nation of evil. But Satan has always been a wolf in sheep's clothing. And isn't it telling that the Bible of the frothing of the mouth Fabian socialist leftists, that of Rules for Radicals written by Chief Fabian Womtom himself, Saul Alinsky, was dedicated to Lucifer, Satan. And then, if you go back to the origins of the Fabian Socialist Society itself, that traces its origins all the way back to 19th century Great Britain, you find that their original iconography was that of a wolf in sheep's clothing. Folks, none of this happens by coincidence. This is done deliberately, and it exposes for everyone to see, anyone who's truly looking at this in an honest and objective fashion, to see exactly what it is that these people are trying to foist upon us and against our will. And you see, that works against the natural law tenets that underpin not only our shared United States Constitution, but also our federalist, representative, Republican form of government. The natural law tenets, those things that trace their origins back to Providence itself, things such as a fair and free government must be one based on the consent of the governed, going all the way back to the summer of 1215 at the field of Runnymede, when King John I of Robin Hood fame was forced by the English baronage to sign the Great Charter or Magna Carta. You see, those are indelible things. They're just as applicable today as they were then,
as they will be, God willing, hundreds of years from now as I sit here and speak into this microphone. But we have to believe it. We have to believe that that is a quintessential part of our heritage. And you see, the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists wish to destroy our heritage. They wish to destroy the understanding that we have of our national identity as well. And that is why they engage in this tiresome and loathsome tactic and strategy of divide and conquer, thereby pitting American citizen against American citizen in the hopes that we tear out each other's jugulars. They want us to bleed out, because if we bleed out, we inherently and intrinsically weaken, thread by thread, the societal fabric of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. There's no way around that, folks. That is the dark truth, the harsh truth that we face as I sit here and speak into this microphone, conveying this message unto you. But one of the things that we have to consider with respect to all of it is just the intellectual disingenuousness that Donald J. Trump has come forth with respect to this whole laughable notion of from Russia with Manafort. That's really it, folks. And there is a former double agent, Russian double agent, well, he's actually an American who was a double agent against the Soviet Union back during the period of, well, not the Soviet Union, but the former Soviet Union, back during 2005 to 2009. For 4 years, this Naval Reserve officer, who was a captain at that time, was defending America, was standing up for America, and was trying to undo the twisted machinations that had been put forth by Vladimir Putin, the strong man of Russia, who has essentially stripped the Crimea Peninsula from the Ukraine and forced it into Russia. Russia is going about with imperialism all over again because Vladdy Putin there wants to be the new age czar. You see, that's the true diabolical nature of it. He wants to recreate the older oligarchy in which the czar actually wielded more power than the Soviet premier. And that is a real danger that we're facing. The entire Ukraine now is facing a battle for its sovereign, independent existence. And Trump has gone out in front of the cameras of the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media and just poo-pooed it, acted as though it were no big, or it was no big thing, no big deal. But it is a big deal. It is a big deal because, as Navid Jamali, the double agent, has shown, Russia has not changed. But here is what Trump said in his own words. At that time, back on July 28th, when the email scandal, the email hacking, and when he went out and said those stupid things, inviting Russia to spy on us, really came to fruition. This is what he said in his own words.
Just a total deflection, this whole thing with Russia. It is so far-fetched. It's so ridiculous. Honestly, I wish I had that power. I'd love to have that power. But Russia has no respect for our country. And that's why, if it is Russia, nobody even knows. It's probably China. Or it could be somebody sitting in his bed. But it shows how weak we are. It shows how disrespected we are. A total sign, assuming it's Russia or China or one of the major countries and competitors, it's a total sign of disrespect for our country. Putin and the leaders throughout the world have no respect for our country anymore, and they certainly have no respect for our leader. So I know nothing about it. It's one of the most far-fetched I've ever heard, yes.
And there you heard the admission from the man himself that he would love to have that kind of power. And of course he went on to say that, why would I have any connection with Putin? I don't know him. I've never spoken with him. The only thing I know about him is that he would respect me. No, he wouldn't. He's Russian. The Russians respect themselves
and they respect trickery and deception. Now, that part of Donaldolf Julius Caesar Trumpellini, I could see Putin respecting. But Putin is going to love chaos, the seeds of chaos that have been sown in the body politique of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. And that is what Donald Trump represents. He is creating this chaos. He is showing that he doesn't believe in restraint, that he finds no intrinsic or inherent value in the supreme law of the land, which, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2 of our shared United States Constitution, is the Constitution itself. That is the major disconnect that we are encountering with respect to Trump. And what Navid said here, or yes, Navid, was that he was appalled in the wake of reports that Russia was behind a massive hack of Democratic National Committee emails. And then to hear Donald Trump directly plead for Vladimir Putin to meddle through espionage in the American elections by exposing Hillary Clinton's emails in order to help the Donaldoff get elected. Now, Donald has since tried to come out and walk that back, claiming that it was mere sarcasm, a joke. It's almost like what we have seen all throughout the disastrous 2 terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime, where Obama, after any setback, comes out and says, well, I just learned about it in the news. Just like everybody else. The buck stops elsewhere. Well, that's what we get with Trump. We are faced with another childlike narcissist who thinks that he knows best and thinks that all power should be centralized in his smally hands, as if that is in the best interests of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. But he doesn't believe that we the people are the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty. He doesn't believe that we are the ones that have been endowed by our Creator with certain fundamental and inalienable rights. And therefore, he's going to just act in any sort of authoritarian way, in a totalitarian way. And it used to be that the Republican Party was opposed to all of this sort of crap. Now, yes, the first Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, certainly had that authoritarian strain. All you have to do is go back through the history of our programs and find a very special edition that we had with our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, discussing the unconstitutionality of Lincoln's actions and the way that Lincoln acted in the strain of a tyrant. But the Republican Party has since moved away from that. But it seems that it is steadily slipping back into this type of destruction. And it's important to also recall that the so-called progressive movement, that one that is yet another front group for the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists who have, for the past century and a half, been just meticulously, tirelessly, and relentlessly and incrementally marching towards fundamentally redefining the United States of America into something that would make us unrecognizable to the founding fathers, that was a Republican. It was Theodore Roosevelt. He was the father of the so-called progressive movement. That was the Bull Moose Party, and its official name was that of the American Progressives Party. So the Republican Party does have these strains, but Trump, at least in living memory, is the only one that has gone this far into the fray. Yes, nobody within their right mind likes the detente wing of the gutless opposition party or GOP. Nobody likes the sellouts like Benedict Arnold, Paul Ryan, and what they have done, except for those that are squishes, those who wish to have the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist agenda continue unimpeded. But the vast majority of the American citizenry does not support that. And we see that Donaldolf Julius Caesar Trumpellini has recognized the outrage and the fires of anger and discontentment that are raging within the hearts, souls, and minds of disillusioned conservatives, and he pulled out a quaff horn and became the Pied Piper of disillusioned conservatives. And we will pay a price for it. But Navid goes on to say in his New York Daily News piece from July 28th that Trump seems hell-bent on
emboldening a Russia that under Putin is already abusing human rights, looking to opportunize off of a chance to throw its weight around in Europe. And of course, that makes sense when you recall that Vladimir Putin is wanting to reestablish the old Russian oligarchy, the czars. The czars were the worst sort of absolutist monarchs. And what's so important to take away from the history of Russia is that they still had serfdom as late as the 20th century. Serfdom is just god-awful, folks. They control where you can go. They own you. In a sense, it is being enslaved by the government. And in that case, the serfs were not allowed to leave their land. They had to ask for permission to marry. They had to pay rent to the landlords that were just part of the Russian oligarchy, and their lives were considered meaningless. Everyone can recall that during World War II, one of the things that had happened, and I know this was after the fall of the czars, but when they were replaced with an equally, if not in some cases, more repressive and oppressive regime in the Soviet communist dictatorship, they would march out, one soldier with a rifle, another soldier with ammo. They didn't give ammunition to all, and they didn't give rifles to all. You were expected to pick that up off of your fallen comrades. But that did not get started with the Soviets. That actually started in World War I. And before that, in the Napoleonic Wars, it was that way too. That's just the way the Russian system had always been. And that is the way that they have always viewed human life. They don't view human life with the same value and respect and dignity that we in the West do. And that's why I think it's so dangerous to try and flirt with Russia. To say, as one of my dear friends has, that we should form an alliance with Russia because that's the only way that we're going to be able to stop Islamofascism. Well, think of how the alliance of the United States and the Soviet Union worked out in World War II. The Soviets, under that psychopathic premier of Joseph Stalin, tried to spread rumors that Hitler hadn't died. They did whatever they could to destroy the Eastern Bloc, to grab as much power and territory as they could, because it was a globalist regime. A regime that sought to enslave the entire impetus of humanity, the entire body of humanity, with their twisted, frothing at the mouth communist agenda. And that sort of command-down oligarchy, a single-party system in which the elections that they held were show. That's all it was. It wasn't real. You really didn't have choices. There was no opposition. And Stalin clearly had the least amount of opposition of any Russian premier because he went through with all of those purges. In fact, Russia was left in a very weak position when Hitler engaged in Operation Barbarossa because Stalin had purged the generals, because he wanted to have people that followed only him. That sort of mentality cheapens human life. It finds no inherent or intrinsic value in human life, and it damn sure does not dovetail with the natural law tenets that underpin and form the bedrock foundation of our shared United States Constitution and indeed our representative Republican form of government. It's foreign, alien, diabolical, and really we shouldn't be trying to form alliances with them. But back to the original question of how did our alliance with the USSR turn out? Well, they stole the nuclear bomb. They stole the plans for it because Robert Oppenheimer was just enthralled with the Soviets. You had Ethel and Julian Rosenberg, who were executed for engaging in espionage connected with the Manhattan Project and various other national intelligence breaches and leaks. They stole the designs for the B-29 so that they had a plane that could carry it, and it sparked the Cold War. The Cold War that gave us such horrific things as MAD, mutually assured destruction. We literally came to the brink of destroying humanity. And what the historical revisionists would have you believe is that the United States of America brought this onto the world, ignoring the fact that the Japanese were ready to wipe out their own people, and that they were ready to just fight to every last man, woman, and child, much like the Islamofascists themselves today are. You see, isn't it amazing that in some ways the tides of history repeat themselves like rippling waves on the shore? But that is what happens if we don't learn from the mistakes of the past. We are doomed to repeat history. And so we have a fanatical enemy. The enemies of freedom, the agent provocateurs of tyranny, despotism, and above all, oppression, will always acquiesce to these radical, fundamentalist ideals that cheapen human life, that find no intrinsic or inherent value in human life. That is what we face. That is the danger that unfurls before our very eyes. And the Russians were not even good allies when they were allies during World War II. When we had a plane that landed in Russian territory, I believe it was one of the Doolittle raiders, managed to get into, and in that case it was communist China. They were held back, but even in Europe there were instances where American pilots, due to their bombers being severely damaged in the flights over Fortress Europe, were forced to land in Soviet territory. The Soviets would detain our pilots. They wouldn't let them return just instantly. We would have to go negotiate to get them out. Does that sound like something a good ally would do? The British never did that to us. The Australians never did that to us. The Free French even didn't do that to us. But the Russians and the Chinese, those that were working to embrace communism and spread it, did. Now, Mao Zedong had let our pilots and crew go only after he had a chance to make a photo op out of it, to try and turn American sentiment against the Kuomintang, which was the nationalist Chinese under Chiang Kai-shek. That shows us just the wicked nature of this imperialist strain of communism and the oligarchies of the old Russian system. They are brutal. They always have been. Now, Putin wants to have that power and more. Remember, he started off as a KGB agent, a Russian intelligence agent. They have no love for the United States. But what they do have, what they truly do have, is an ability to understand the thought process of the West. They do understand how we in the West think, and I know he tries to act as though he doesn't speak English, but we know he speaks English very well. He knows what to say. And that's why you'll hear one thing when he's speaking directly to the people, he being Vladimir Putin, and another thing when he speaks to the global press or to his own people. He is stoking the flames of Russian nationalism, wanting them to go back to the same type of pride that they once felt when they were under the tutelage of the czars. Again, this is why Putin is dangerous, and why I think it would be an egregious error to try and tie our lot in with Russia. And if you recall, one of the things that George W. Bush said that was laughably insane was that he looked into the eyes of Vladimir Putin and could see into the soul and saw a good man. You know what I see when I look into his eyes? I see a tyrant. I see a despot. I see a man who loathes and despises everything that these United States of America stands for and represents. I see a man who is diametrically opposed to our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, a man who wants to spread chaos, anarchy, and terror throughout the world. That's why he was so quick to support another dictator. The Russians were always for totalitarianism. And isn't it funny that during the American Civil War, the Russians had offered to come in with an alliance with the United States? Even Abraham Lincoln saw the error of trying to go in with that. Even that was a step too far for America's tyrant. But here it is. We see that Donald J. Trump is just looking at Russia, and Putin has basically sent a package to him from Russia with man love. And the connections that Trump's campaign director or manager there in Paul Manafort has with the Russians should raise red flags and sound off alarm bells for every decent, hard-working, red-blooded American citizen, because it shows us that something foul is afoot. Something that goes against the direct interests of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours is really working against us. And so we heard that Donnie tried to play this off as, well, it could be somebody in their own bed. Who cares? Donnie, you were the one that still went out, even if it was a joke, and seditiously claimed that Russia should come in and expose those emails to the world. And it's certainly in line with the things you've done in the past. Now, I know that there are many within the rank and file of the Lion Branch Trumpidians that would try and tell us that, oh, we shouldn't look at the things Trump said 2 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 30 seconds ago. But no, we should. Trump had praised the Communist Chinese for putting down the student uprising in Tiananmen Square, an uprising that was about freedom, an uprising that embodied the same type of spirit that our founding fathers exhibited 240 years ago when they penned the Declaration of Independence. That was back in 1989. He then sang the praises for the now late Kim Jong-il, saying that he had a very difficult job there and that no one else could do what he was doing and that he had to convince the military that he was going to rule. Again, showing a woeful lack of understanding when it comes to how communist dictatorships and regimes work. And this is a man who didn't know what the nuclear triad is: aircraft, land-based air-to-surface missiles, and submarines. Nuclear submarines that could launch nuclear missiles and payloads from all over the world. And during the debate, when he was asked what is the most important aspect or arm of the nuclear triad, I believe it was Hugh Hewitt that had asked that, the answer to that really is kind of simple, folks. What is your most stealthy arm? It's not the aircraft. They can be shot down. They can have problems. They can be taken out more easily at their land bases and cannot be around the world near indefinitely. It's not your land targets, same time, or your land payloads, same kind of thing there. It's the submarines that can travel the globe and never really need to resurface except for food, and that's about it, that can go anywhere in the world and launch their nuclear payload. That is the most vital aspect of the nuclear triad, but Trump didn't know what it was. And then, again, Trump had to ask national security experts and personnel why we couldn't just nuke other nations. Folks, that isn't a joke. That isn't something that should be taken lightly. That is something that should make the hair on the back of your neck stand on end, because it means that we could be heading back to the days of the Cold War. And again, folks, as I sit here and speak into this microphone conveying this message unto you, I'm not engaging in fear-mongering. I'm just calling the facts as I see them. These are just the facts. And so we know that Trump has this affinity for strongmen and authoritarians. He has connections in his own campaign with strongmen and authoritarians, with Paul Manafort receiving that $12.7 million from the pro-Russian former Ukrainian prime minister. And think about it. Back on March 18th of 2014, this is Navid again, Russia did something it hasn't done since the height of the Cold War. It seized the Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine, which is a sovereign country. If you recall, as Navid does in his New York Daily Times article, that during the lead up to Operation Desert Storm, the Persian Gulf War, the Iraqis had done this to Kuwait. The world ganged up on him and pushed him out. We haven't seen that with Russia. Europe's afraid of Russia. Europe is reminded of the dark, dank days of the Cold War
And of course, the dark, dank days of the Second World War. Europe itself has a history of appeasement. Remember, Neville Chamberlain had appeased the territorial and imperial ambitions of the little Austrian corporal Adolf Hitler. He had gone out to the Bergstrom, or the Burghof, which was in Oberstrassburg, right there in Bavaria, and had attempted to placate Germany by essentially telling them that they could carve up Czechoslovakia. Hitler wanted the Rhineland, but after he had the Rhineland, he didn't want to stop there. But he agreed that this would be the last of his territorial ambitions, and Neville Chamberlain flew back to England waving a paper in front of the cameras of their graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media and the BBC, and said, "Oh, looky, looky, we have peace in our time." Meanwhile, back in Bavaria, Hitler turned to his foreign minister von Ribbentrop and has said, "I have seen my enemy, and they are worms." So appeasement does not work, yet Europe thinks that they are so enlightened, that they have been enthralled with the Fabian socialism for so long that they can just talk to their brother socialists over there in the Russian Federation and magically appease him. Or just say, "No, no, don't do it again, bad boy," and he'll stop. But nothing could be further from the truth. That is not what the Russians understand. The Russians, being the brutal people that they are, and the people themselves can be quite lovely, but they do have a brutal outlook, and their government has always been brutal. It's power. They respect and understand power. And Trump may think that Vladimir Putin respects him because he gives off an air of power, but no, Vladimir Putin respects the chaos that Trump will unleash upon the global theater. He respects it because he sees this as an opportunity. Remember that Putin is an opportunist of the worst caliber and sort. He will seize upon any opportunity to enrich himself at the great expense of the global community, at the great expense of the sovereignty of these United States of America, against our interests, against the peace of the world. Now, I'm not saying this like some kumbaya-loving hippie. I'm not saying this as one who believes in the foolish notions of leading from behind like Barack Hussein Obama. I say this as a concerned American who sees our own influence being threatened here, who sees our own national interests and security being weakened, particularly when Trump was going out there and inviting the Russian oligarchs to come and hack into American systems. What happened to pride in the country? Again, I know that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists don't have it, and I know that Trump is, or at least has espoused for the vast majority of his 70 years spent on God's green earth, been a frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist, but he is pretending to be at the helm of the Republican Party, the party that did go out and stop Saddam Hussein. There's a lot that's wrong with George H.W. Bush, Persian Gulf War there. Read my lips. He had a lot of problems. But what he did in the Persian Gulf War was good. Although it didn't go far enough, we still had to go back, and maybe that was a mistake. Trump tries to say it's a mistake. Trump tries to blame 9/11 on George W. Bush. This is the man that is vying for the highest office in the land, a man who has no ability to restrain himself from saying stupid things. If he can't control what comes out of his mouth, what makes you think he can control himself when it comes to issues of great national security and importance? When he's sitting there asking national security experts why we can't nuke nations, that is asinine. It's stupid. It's dangerous. Yet the Lion Branch Trumpidians don't give a damn. They have found their fearless leader. They have found this desire to have an authoritarian seize the reins of political power in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours, and they see it as an opportunity to secure their own power, to push for their twisted misdeeds and machinations. But it doesn't work, and it can't work, and it exposes the United States of America and our allies to great danger. The way that Trump just so recklessly wants to deflate the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, is also a truly disgusting thing. If we don't live up to the treaties that we have created, then we irreparably harm America's reputation around the world. In other words, we convince people that we don't mean what we say, that we're frauds, that we're liars. Yes, we've suffered under the tutelage of 2 disastrous terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime, leading from its behind, that are frauds, that have not been looking out for the best interests of the United States of America and her people. But I'm not so convinced that we'd get the same, or that we would get something that's different with Donald Trump. He's not shown me that he is interested in American hegemony. Sure, he tries to do a sales pitch along that, but the inconsistent and the contradictory positions that he has assumed, particularly with our role in NATO, makes no sense. There are more nations that are opposed to what Russia is doing than are for it, and therefore to try and seek an alliance with a force of great destabilization within Europe would be like trying to form a pact with the devil. Putin is a devil. Putin is a wicked, totalitarian, and evil man. But the fact that Trump can't see this, oh, sure, he says, well, Putin doesn't respect us, but he'd respect me. Again, that's this narcissistic tendency. Have we not suffered enough under the 2 disastrous terms of the narcissist that currently resides at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue there in Washington, D.C.? Have we not suffered enough of a man who forms political enemies lists, who tries to tell people to get into the face of their political opponents to make them uncomfortable? I thought we have. 8 years of that kind of leadership is appalling. But then you recall that Trump, all throughout the primary process, had incited violence, had sat there and said, in the good old days, we take those people out on stretchers. I'll pay the legal fees of those who go out and just knock the blank out of people. Those aren't American values, particularly when it comes to people exercising their free speech rights. Again, what we have reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, is this, that our rights end where another sovereign, popular individual's rights begin. The individual, popular sovereign must be respected. Their rights must be respected. That is why we are a representative Republican form of government as opposed to a democracy. But yes, in the case of the protesters that wanted to silence Trump, they should have been prevented from doing so if they had gone in such a way as to threaten his rights. But here's the thing. The First Amendment prohibits governmental abridgment and encroachment upon those rights, not private citizens. You don't have necessarily a right to be heard. But Trump, showing once again a woeful lack of understanding of constitutional law and its application, went out and said that they were infringing his rights, when nothing could be further from the truth. And the Lion Branch Trumpidians have gone into that hook, line, and sucker. Now, as with respect to the claims that those who were saying he should be silenced or should be held accountable for inciting violence, that was encroaching upon his free speech rights. No, the fighting words doctrine is a very real thing. Again, it goes back to that thing I just mentioned, that aspect of American jurisprudence and constitutional law that I mentioned, that our rights end where another individual popular sovereign's rights begin. So the idea that there is this disconnect, this idea that Trump is okay even though he has this from Russia with man love connection through Paul Manafort with the Russian dictator, has said nicely things about the Russian dictator, that should play into it, because that speaks to the man's character, or more appropriately, lack thereof. Again, folks, the way that this Federalist Representative Republic of ours was created, the way it was devised and designed, it is the duty, obligation, and above all, responsibility of we, the people, in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, to stand up for, to proactively maintain, and defend our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. No one else is endowed with the authority to do that. No one can be a deified presence, a cult of personality, and singularly save this nation. That is the path to fascism. That is the path to totalitarianism. That is a path that leads to dire consequences that are diametrically opposed to the natural law tenets that form the bedrock foundation of our republic. And unless and until we come to terms with that, and unless and until we begin to fully recognize the true dangers that are presented not just by Donald J. Trump, but also by Hillary Rotten Clinton, then we're going to continue to see the death spiral that ails and plagues the United States of America currently not only continue unabated, but it is going to accelerate at an exponential rate. We have to be exceedingly cognizant of this fact. And that, again, folks, is the reason why we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, come forth and produce these shows. We do it for you. We do it to empower you. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. She won't be serving you Trump vodka. We have better vodka than that. Vodka made in the United States, if you want vodka. As always, folks, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. I invite you to leave any questions, comments, or concerns that you may have either here on our YouTube page or our Google Plus page, or indeed even our Facebook page. And on top of that, I invite you to follow us on Twitter with the Twitter handle at Radio Aviation EX. Again, folks, that's at Radio Aviation EX, and there you will find our departure board that lists my personal Twitter account, the personal Twitter account of my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, our Blogspot account that has audio blogs and is just chock full of all sorts of useful information, and then there is the Cafe Press account. Now, folks, with the Cafe Press account, you will find all sorts of trinkets and goodies at reasonable prices, ranging from shot glasses, drinking glasses, shirts, shoes, hats, watches, clocks, neckties, iPhone, iPad covers, Android phone, Android pad covers and protectors, tote bags, you name it, either with our traditional classical logo on it or our first-class passenger logo on it. They're all there at reasonable prices, and with such a wide array of products, surely you'll find something that meets your best interests and needs. Go ahead and take a gander at that, folks, and give us a little bit of support so that we can continue to bring you this indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment that we do every time we take off over the friendly airwaves. Thank you again, folks, for flying the Wright Flyer. We'll see you again next time. Do take care.